Hashtag Iron and Order, why nuclear submarines can stay underwater for months. 150 meters below the surface of the Atlantic, an Ohio-class submarine slides through absolute darkness at 12 knots. Its hull groans under a pressure equivalent to 350 tons pressing down on every square meter of steel. The crew is asleep in coffin racks that line the narrow corridors. The galley is quiet. The reactor hums at steady state, a controlled atomic fire contained in a vessel the size of a single room. And it has been underwater for 74 days. The ship's fuel, its uranium, will not run out for another 16 days. The air, by contrast, should have been poisoned hours ago. Every sailor aboard breathes, exhales carbon dioxide, and the ship's internal atmosphere should have become lethal within weeks. Yet here they remain, suspended in the abyss, alive and vigilant, their oxygen meters steady, their carbon dioxide scrubbers still working. The submarine can remain submerged until the food runs out or the crew mutinies from boredom. Not because of some exotic fuel. Not because of a magic trick. But because the engineers solved a problem so fundamental that most people never think to ask the question in the first place. How do you breathe when you cannot surface? For most of human history, that question had no answer. Submarines during the World Wars could stay down for hours, perhaps a day. Diesel engines required air. Batteries died. The depth above you felt like a ticking clock. But in the 1950s, something shifted. Nuclear engineers realized that if you could split atoms in a confined space, you could generate enough heat to power a submarine indefinitely. The first atomic submarine, the USS Nautilus, proved it in 1954. She cruised under the Arctic ice for weeks. The Navy suddenly had a weapon with no real limit on endurance. Except for one thing, the crew still had to breathe. And it took engineers a decade to solve that problem. The solution was not a single invention. It was a closed loop, a machine that takes the very thing that would kill you and turns it back into the thing that keeps you alive. It is a trick so elegant, and so alien to how most people think about air, that once you understand it, submarines stop seeming mysterious and start seeming inevitable. The mechanism has three parts. First, the reactor generates heat. Second, that heat drives a steam turbine that moves the ship and powers the submarine's electrical systems. Third, and this is where the real trick lives, those same electrical systems do something extraordinary. They electrolyze seawater. Electrolysis is not exotic science. You may have seen it in a high school chemistry class. Run an electric current through salt water, and the water molecule splits into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen bubbles away. The oxygen accumulates. Inside an Ohio-class submarine, this process happens continuously in a compartment called the oxygen generator. The reactor produces roughly 40 megawatts of heat. The turbines convert a fraction of that into electricity. Some of that electricity runs the ship. The rest drives the electrolysis cells. These cells extract oxygen from the ocean itself. A human being at rest consumes roughly 250 milliliters of oxygen per minute. An Ohio-class submarine carries roughly 150 sailors. That means the crew consumes roughly 37.5 cubic meters of fresh oxygen every single day. The generators produce enough to match that demand continuously. The mathematics is neat, almost mechanical. The ocean becomes the fuel tank, and the electrical current becomes the key that unlocks the oxygen locked inside every molecule. But oxygen alone is not enough. As those sailors breathe, they exhale carbon dioxide. In a closed room, which a submarine absolutely is, carbon dioxide accumulates. Breathe in the same air twice, and you rebreathe your own exhalation. The CO2 concentration rises. At 5% of the atmosphere, it causes headaches. At 7%, confusion and drowsiness. At 10%, the symptoms become severe. At 15%, loss of consciousness. The submarine has to scrub it out. This is where the second part of the system enters. Deep in the submarine, in compartments throughout the vessel, are canisters filled with lithium hydroxide. When air passes through these canisters, moved by ventilation fans powered by the same nuclear reactor, the lithium hydroxide absorbs carbon dioxide in a chemical reaction. The CO2 is permanently locked into a solid compound. The air emerges clean and ready to breathe again. An Ohio-class submarine carries roughly 8,000 kilograms of lithium hydroxide canisters at the start of a patrol. The crew replaces and refreshes these canisters throughout the mission. If they run out, the mission ends. Not because the ship is damaged. Not because the fuel fails. But because the crew will start suffocating in a toxic soup of their own breath. This is the real puzzle at the heart of submarine endurance, and it is almost never the reason people assume. Most civilians, when they think about a submarine staying underwater for months, imagine the reactor fuel as the limiting factor. They picture a tank getting emptier and emptier until the ship has to surface to refuel. This assumption is almost entirely wrong. The USS Ohio, the lead ship of her class, carries enough enriched uranium to power the submarine for roughly 20 years of continuous operation. The reactor will not be exhausted in the lifetime of the ship. The fuel is not the bottleneck. It never has been since the nuclear age began. The bottleneck is always the air. A patrol lasts roughly 90 days. After 90 days, several limits converge. The food supply begins to strain. The psychological toll of confinement becomes acute. And, critically, the lithium hydroxide canisters approach depletion. A well-trained crew in a well-maintained boat could theoretically extend the mission, but the risk of air poisoning becomes untenable. The submarine surfaces, resupplies, and departs for another cycle. Think about what this means. The machine that never needs fuel needs air constantly. It is an inversion of common sense so complete that it reshapes everything we think we know about endurance. A nuclear submarine is not limited by atoms. It is limited by the breath of the humans inside it. The generators electrolyzing seawater produce the oxygen. The lithium hydroxide canisters trap the carbon dioxide. The reactor provides the electrical current that drives both processes. Together, these three systems create a perfectly closed loop. Nothing enters except food and supplies. Nothing leaves except waste. The submarine becomes a sealed terrarium 90 meters long, moving through an alien ocean in the dark. The twist is simple but profound. Everyone assumes fuel is the constraint. In a submarine, fuel is nearly infinite. Air is the precious resource. The engineers did not solve the problem of staying underwater. They solved the problem of staying alive while sealed in a metal tube beneath tons of water. They created a machine that eats the ocean and breathes its own exhaust. Submarines have been underwater for months not because of some miraculous fuel source, but because the Navy figured out how to trick the human body into functioning in an environment where nothing natural exists. The oxygen comes from seawater. The carbon dioxide is locked in white canisters buried deep in the hull. The reactor runs silent in the background, asking nothing of the world above. It is one of the most counterintuitive systems ever built, and it works because it is not trying to replace the surface world. It is replacing the laws of the surface world with laws of chemistry and physics that work anywhere, even 150 meters down in the cold and the dark. The machines that move the modern world are stranger than they look. Subscribe, and we will take apart the next giant together.